All right, well, everybody, welcome to this month's What's the Point webinar, where we're going to talk about what the point is of tidying your database. My name is Michael Faulkner, and I lead the solutions or sales team here at Touchpoint. And joining me this month is our very own Haley Whitworth, who leads our marketing and education team. Haley,
Hello.
welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So she's filling in for Andrew Triplett this week. Andrew will be back next month. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things as usual. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please just click on the Q&A icon, type it in, and then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. And if we can, we'll address it. And if we can't, we'll follow up in an email. All right, so now let's get into what we're here to talk about today, which is database tidiness. I'm going to actually start things off a little bit today by talking about what constitutes clean data to begin with, and then ultimately what causes data to get untidy. And then from there, Haley is going to talk about auditing your data and then processes and ongoing maintenance around keeping your database clean in an ongoing basis. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And again, I'm going to start with talking about what makes clean data. So each church will need to ultimately evaluate what is a clean people record. That's kind of where things start, right? So each church will have to decide what information is needed or desired on a person's record. And a good basic rule of thumb is first name, last name, and at least one form of contact, like a phone number, an email address, or just your normal address. It's also nice to have date of birth so that we know how to best minister to that individual, where they can plug into the church effectively. But also remember that a clean database is not always a complete database. In other words, sometimes if the records are incomplete, that gives you an excuse to reach out to someone, which obviously opens the door for another ministry opportunity. All right, so similarly, each church will want to determine what information is stored in an involvement. Now, if you are a Touchpoint partner church, you know what an involvement is. If you're not, an involvement is essentially anything going on at your church that has people coming together for ministry purposes. That might be a Sunday school class, or it could be a life group. It might be a men's or women's retreat, kids camp. I mean, the whole point is if people are coming together for ministry in some sort of a group or an organization or a team, it's going to be called an involvement. So inside of Touchpoint, we check that each involvement has a leader and that it has the correct status of the individual members that are part of that involvement. In other words, are they an active member or are they an inactive member? We also want to be sure that it has a schedule and that the involvement type is there and that the program and divisions that it is associated with or tied to are also there as well. All right, so that is clean data. Now, what causes clean data to become untidy to begin with? Well, I am kind of out there on the tip of the spear. I get to talk to a lot of our future partner churches before they become partner churches. And a lot of the feedback that I hear from them about where they are today is, or where they are in their existing database, is that they have too many duplicate records, or they're just not sure that they're reaching their intended audiences. Emails are bouncing, data's outdated. So the question is always, ultimately, how did they get there? Well, there are a number of different ways the data can become untidy, right? For various reasons. So first of all, if someone registers for an event and they use a different email address, then there's a decent chance a duplicate record is going to be created. Or if your church uses relaxed requirements during registrations, meaning it's not collecting as much information per registrant, then there's also going to be a duplicate record created in that kind of a situation. Another reason is human error. So if staff members use the nickname of an individual instead of the first name, then you're probably going to see a duplicate. Also, if a staff member doesn't vet the record for accuracy and completeness after it's been created, then what you're going to end up with is more of an incomplete type record. So at Touchpoint, we have settings that you can enable that require certain fields to be completed upon new records entering the system. Third, if there's bad or if there are missing processes, it's going to be very easy for data to become untidy. For example, if no one owns the process, then data is going to become untidy. In a few minutes, Haley's actually going to talk a little bit about good processes you can have in place to ensure that that doesn't happen. Fourth, members can't update their data on their own information. Yeah, maybe, or maybe they just don't know how. Another thing that Haley's going to touch on here in a few minutes is how to make the process of updating their data as easy as possible. Another way the data becomes untidy is data silos, right? So if you have, for example, the children's ministry keeping their information in one place, like an Excel spreadsheet, but the women's and men's ministries are keeping their data in another area, you're going to end up with an incomplete picture of that family. Inactive people records can also appear in search results. So if someone is really, truly no longer involved in your church, we always suggest archive them. Don't purge them, but archive them. In fact, my wife and I just rejoined a church after leaving them 17 years ago. You never know when someone's going to re-engage in the church. So don't get rid of them, but do archive them. Touchpoint offers automated processes to handle it for you, but you don't need to see those inactive people records in all of your searches. That just clutters things up. And another way to clutter things up is by reusing, by having too many involvements. So we always suggest reusing involvements instead of creating those new ones. This will help you keep the database from becoming cluttered with so many different involvements that people could be part of. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Haley. Haley's going to talk about how you can audit your database. Haley?
That's right. All right. Thank you. Yep. So now we're going to do just that. And we're going to talk about how we can determine if and where we have any incomplete information. So the first place that we're going to start with is a people record audit. Inside of Touchpoint, we have some search tools that will help us to identify incomplete information. And so, of course, that incomplete information can lead to ministry opportunities. So we definitely want to make use of these tools. What we're looking at right now is the basic people search. And so what we can begin by doing is filtering for our list of members. And so the members should be the closest people to the church. These should be the people that we know the best. And so once we complete this step, then we can filter for either gender or marital status. And so you can see in this example, we have filtered for marital status. And so this will give us a good look to see how many members we have where we don't know their marital status. And so this database actually looks pretty good. We only see 13 people. Again, these are the members, and we don't know their marital status. So somehow we either missed inputting this information, we just didn't collect it, maybe we don't know it. And so this either gives us a ministry opportunity, or if we do know it, we just need to go in there and update that people record. So this is a good way of highlighting that. So again, 13 is a pretty low number. We want to see this number moving towards 0. Another thing that we can do while we're in the people search is we can sort by name. Sometimes dummy records get created whenever we're testing things. So we can sort by the name to easily locate those dummy people records. And on that note, I will say it's important to remember that we don't ever recommend deleting a people record unless they are dummy records. So let's consider this example. And I know Michael touched on this just a minute ago. But let's say that there is a child who is visiting a church. The child is from out of state. Maybe she is attending church with her grandparents. Some churches might be tempted to just delete that people record because the child is from out of state. But when the child comes back and visits her grandparents and she visits the church again, we don't want to say to her, oh, I see you've never been here before. Maybe she was just there last month. So with Touchpoint, as we know, it doesn't cost anything extra to keep those people records in the database. So there's no need to delete them. Now we're going to talk about auditing involvements. So for our involvements, we want to make sure that we are correctly using active versus inactive. And Michael, again, he touched on that. So if an involvement is no longer being used, if it's no longer holding meetings, then what we would do is we would drop the members and then we would change the status from active to inactive. Also in Touchpoint, we have a couple of different ways that we can categorize involvements. And the first is with programs and divisions. We shouldn't see a long list of programs. So this can cause some frustration among your staff as they are creating an involvement, and if they don't know how to categorize it because that program list is too long. It's okay to have a longer list of divisions, but we just want to make sure that we're keeping that broader category a little bit more succinct. And then another way to categorize involvements is with the use of involvement types. And so that's a really good way to describe the involvement or to describe its function. So your church can determine which involvement types will be most useful. And some that we have seen with some of our church partners, we've seen connect groups. So those can be for Sunday school classes, maybe small groups. We've seen serve in for volunteering opportunities within the church, serve out for mission trip opportunities. And once you have all of those involvement types in place, then that can help you discover how plugged in someone is just by evaluating the different involvement types they're associated with. And we're about to see an example of that on this next slide here. We can see that Mel is in a few different connect groups. She is serving inside of the church in a couple of places. So we see that under the serve in. And then under serve out, we see that she has a mission trip that she's going to be going on. So this gives us a really good idea of how well-rounded the person's church involvement is. Next, we're going to talk about some lookup codes. And of course, the lookup codes are found underneath the administration menu. And so this is, or rather, these are the lists that are found within the drop-down menus whenever we see a drop-down inside of Touchpoint. So here are some examples that we may want to dig into more deeply. So we can use resident codes to segment our people. So we want to make sure that these remain accurate. And as your church establishes new methods for outreach and bringing people into the church, we want to make sure that the entry points match those ministry efforts as well. So the point is that we need to be capturing data that is relevant to our ministry. And if our entry points, if they haven't been updated in a decade, and if our resident codes are out of date, then we're not going to be able to accurately segment our people. And then the final note on this slide is about keywords. Keywords can be cleaned up if you get duplicates. It's very simple to merge and delete any similar keywords for tasks and notes, so make sure that you're staying on top of those as well. All right, communications audit. So we'll start with templates. So we can audit for any unused templates. We can create a new role and hide those no longer needed templates behind those specifically created roles. We can create new templates whenever we have a brand refresh, if we have upcoming events, maybe special fundraising initiatives. So it's a good idea just to, from time to time, go visit your templates and see, what you might need to do and what you can do to help organize and keep those clean. Evaluate your SMS groups and reply words. So do we need to create a new group? Do the ministry focus areas call for new reply words? If we're using two-way texting, we need to make sure that we have someone monitoring the incoming text to see if there are opportunities for new reply words as well. So what are the types of things that people are texting the church? Are there gaps in the ministry that we might need to address? And similarly, if a lot of people are texting the same type of message where we need to have a similar response, can that response be set up as a reply word? And then additionally, we need to review our list of reply words for any outdated events or maybe messages that are time-based. Extra values. So as we know, extra values exist on people records and on involvements, and we can use our extra value summary reports to get a full picture of the extra values that we have in place on our database. A lot of churches have extra values created as a result of the data conversion. So it's a good idea to review the list to see if there, excuse me, is any unnecessary data. Excuse me, I may need to get some water.
Don't bail on me now, Haley. I haven't practiced your part. Sorry, shouldn't try to make you laugh while you're drinking. Although that would make for great what's the point content.
Think I can power through.
Okay.
So, excuse me, we just might need to review the list to see if there is any information from that data conversion that let's say we no longer need. If that information isn't being used, it's a good time to evaluate that. And goodness. And we want to also keep in mind that we're using friendly naming conventions. So your database admin will be the person who is responsible for creating these extra values, but it's going to be the staff who are the people who are going in and updating and filling out the information. So we want to make sure that the naming conventions that we're using make sense, that they're just friendly names, so that as the people are going and updating them, they don't have to wonder, or it doesn't take them too long to read them. And as we review our extra values, and we can see listed here where all we can find extra values on a people record, are our extra values organized in the best way possible? So instead of all of them being on the extra values tab, does it make sense to have more of them on the volunteer tab? Does it make sense to move some to the entry tab or to the member tab? Should some of these extra values be converted to notes now, since we have the notes feature? Additionally, is there any data in here that would make sense to create a status flag for? And then the final note that I'll make on this slide, if there are any extra values that store sensitive information, we want to make sure that we double check that those are protected by a role. All right, so it's a good idea to, from time to time, audit your user roles. So these are the roles that you will assign to your staff and to your lay leaders. And so you can get to this screen by navigating to the administration menu and then clicking on users. And so this will allow you to ensure that the appropriate people have the intended roles. And so staff turnover is inevitably going to happen. Lay leaders are going to take on new roles. So it's important to make sure that as positions are vacated, that we have the roles assigned to the people who actually need them. Similarly, if and when there is staff turnover, we need to be sure to go to the administrative settings and update these two settings, admin mail and new people manager. So this is going to ensure that the appropriate people will receive the important system generated communications from the church. All right, so we're at our final section here, processes and ongoing maintenance. Now that we have done all of the work to get the database organized, we're going to talk about what we can do to keep it that way, to maintain it. So create standards for data input. Michael started talking about this. So what records should go into the database? If a Connect card is filled out and it only has a first name, does that need to go in? It may not need to go in. But if it has a first name and a phone number, okay, well then that probably does go in. And then, what information do we want to see on those newly created people records? Is it first name, last name, email? If you do decide to relax some requirements for newly created people records, then of course that's going to save some time for your registrants, but it's going to take more time for the staff to clean up. So just make those decisions, whose time is it that that we're most concerned about, and then communicate that to your staff and to your lay leaders to make sure that everybody is on the same page. We also encourage everyone to have set up your entry points and include those on all of your involvements. And then you can evaluate how people are first coming to the church. So it's really helpful to know if there is a particular ministry that's doing a great job of reaching out and getting people involved. And then have a plan for incoming data. So at Touchpoint, we encourage church partners to have at least one new people manager. And so this is going to be the person who's responsible for vetting those new people records. So they should know what is considered a complete record. And then they can, determine what information is missing. We've talked about completing database audits. So just, periodically do that so that you can determine where your holes are. So it's January, start of a new year. So this is a great time to do your first database audit for the year. Stress ministry opportunities. So if there is missing information, encourage your ministry leaders and your lay leaders to connect with those people. So utilize this as an opportunity for engagement. Search for duplicate records. So duplicate records are not always going to be a bad thing, but we do want to address them. So duplicate records can provide us with updated information. So if a duplicate record was created, then that means that there wasn't a 100% match for the record. So maybe there's a new email address or maybe there's a new phone number. Well, great. Now we have that updated information on that person and we have a better, cleaner database. So the best way to get accurate and updated information is to just ask your congregation to update their people records. So we encourage our Touchpoint churches to provide deep links so that the churchgoers can just click on the link and be taken directly to their people record inside of the mobile app. And so that's going to make it very easy for them to have all of their information, make sure it's updated, and they can do that very, very easily. All right, well, I think that's a wrap. Let's go ahead and see if there are any questions. Or Michael, did you have anything you wanted to add or you want to jump into questions?
No, I just am glad you were able to storm through that. The funny irony here is that Haley and I were on a meeting yesterday and I was having a coughing attack and I said, you need to be prepared to bail me out. So I'm not sure if this is payback or what, but I'm just glad you didn't make me do it. Thank you. But yeah, we do have quite a few questions coming in. The first one that came through was, how do you find dummy records?
All right. So, of course, this is going to be, dependent on the example that I gave earlier was to filter by name. So of course, this is going to be dependent on if your church names them a certain, in a certain way. But that's one way that in our kind of in our internal databases, that's one way that we can identify those dummy records because we typically start them with the letter A. So I guess that's going to be dependent on, how you have them named inside of your church.
Great. There's a guy named Will who asked a question about you being out of breath. I think I'm going to pass that one. For those of you who don't know, that's her husband. What is the best practice for recycling and involvement?
Okay, good. So whenever the involvement, let's say it's for an event that is no longer needed or that has already occurred, then what we would do is we would drop the members so they would become inactive members, and then we would change the involvement status to inactive. And so then, if a similar event happens again next year, then we can just go to our involvement search and search for our inactive involvements and search for, if it was for camp, for example, search for our camp involvement, and then we'll be able to identify it and start the process from there. So change any questions that we might need to change our messaging and so forth.
All right, thank you. Another question that came in was, how do we assign someone to be a new people manager?
That is in a setting, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it's actually just called the new people manager. Let me look it up. It's under the administration menu, and let's see, under system administration, new people manager. And I believe is a Yep, it's a drop down. It's a people picker.
A people picker. Awesome. Okay, here's another question, and I like this one because I've never really been asked it and I haven't thought about it. But are deep links only for mobile apps? I would have said yes, but is there any other way that a deep link would be used?
No, what they do is they link you to a specific spot inside of the mobile app.
Okay, that was my understanding too. So to be clear about deep links, you have registration links, you have links that'll take you to a payment page. Whereas a registration link is going to open a form for you to fill out information, a deep link is going to, when you click on that in a text, if you will, it's going to Haley's point, it's going to open a specific mobile app for you, and it's going to take you directly to the page that is intended to be opened within that mobile app. So for instance, a church might say, hey, we are at our year end, we want to do giving. If you haven't done your year end gift, text give to 21289. You get a text back and it's going to have that deep link. When you click on it, it will open your mobile app and take you straight to the giving page. That's what a deep link does.
Yes. And then if they don't have the mobile app installed, then it will fall back to the web. So it's going to drive adoption for the mobile app. But it will, if they don't have the mobile app, it will open in a web browser as well.
Right.
I do see one question here. What about changing an inactive involvement to something totally new? Is it okay to recycle an involvement, rename it, change program, divisions, etc.? That's not something that we would recommend doing. So we recommend just creating a new involvement in that scenario. So we recommend, if you are going to recycle involvements, which of course that is our suggestion, that you do that. But if you recycle involvements, it's going to be for the same purpose. And then there's another question about deleting duplicate records. Someone's been added to a household twice. And it's only one person, you would just merge those records. Trying to read the next two really fast.
Yep. Is there a search already created to find records with missing information, such as gender and marital status?
The people search that was on the first slide. So by navigating to people menu, and then I think it's just called search. It's under manage and search. So then you can filter for unknown gender, unknown marital status.
So Haley, I have a question for you. When a church does struggle with data silos, what have you seen be a best practices way for them to encourage those guilty parties, shall we call them, of moving away from what they're comfortable to whatever the database of record is?
Well, really, I guess the best way to do it, I would think, is to make sure that they understand why it's important. Because if you have your data silo, let's say I'm using something for my own information, I've got an Excel spreadsheet. Well, everything that I have, I know is accurate, but I'm the only one. My Excel spreadsheet isn't communicating with anybody else. So if we've got the children's ministry that is preferring one single source of truth and one place to store their information, but then the adult ministry has another place that they're keeping their information, well, then that's an incomplete household, so to say. That we don't have we might have whoever, let's say one of them storing it in Touchpoint, we don't have a complete picture of what that household looks like because one or the other isn't using the same system.
Right. Yeah, and I always find showing what's in it for them. If you show them the benefit to them personally, a lot of times they're going to be a little more inclined to buy into that idea. There are a couple of follow-up questions that I'm intrigued by. Is there a way to see the history of changes within an involvement? For example, if we reuse an involvement for a recurring annual camp, can we find a snapshot of the messages and the registrations for a previous year?
really the best, that's not going to be retained on the actual involvement, but you can always see that if you go to some of the transactional messages or the emails, you can find that. Of course, that's not going to be lost. And everything else will be retained. So, if you're looking for the members, you're still going to see a list of members. One thing that I'm changing gears, it just popped into my head. Somebody asked a minute ago about looking up or if there were any searches, and I suggested the basic people search. And I just want to also mention, you can set up save searches to find things like, if there are missing, if you want to set up a search filter search to find like people records that don't have a member status, or people records that don't have a marital status. And similarly, if you want to set up, search filter searches to find people who were in an involvement when it was called this, so you can still locate those people. All right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in right now.
So we might let out a little early. Does anyone else have any questions? Did you see the one about, it was kind of a follow-up to a question you already answered, the example that was used for senior ministry?
Okay, and we'll follow up with that.
Okay, all right, excellent. All right, well, if there are not any more questions, we'll give you 5 minutes of your day back. And again, now that we've started off the new year, we will be doing these What's the Point webinars every month. And again, the whole idea is to ask, what's the point of the ministry tasks that we do on a daily basis? We want to address them at a high level. And then, of course, we then show how that can be used within the Touchpoint system, so that those who are partner churches see what they can do in their system, and those who are not partner churches might see some of the possibilities. So we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.